Hi, and welcome to the next episode of the series Yoga Poses Explained. Today we're going to take a look at Warrior 2. But let's take it from the top. Why is it called Warrior 2? To be very honest with you, I don't know to the very base what the different numbers are. But seen from the perspective of a flow, Warrior 2 would very often be right after Warrior 1. However, Warrior 3 does not usually follow after Warrior 2. But let's take a closer look at that. We will begin in Warrior 1. So just to remind you once again, in Warrior 1, the hips are facing more or less forward. They cannot be 100% facing forward because the foot that is behind is not facing to the front. It's facing slightly to the outer edge of the mat. So for this reason, the hips cannot be facing forward. Otherwise, we would break the foot if we were 100% facing forward in Warrior 1. But what happens then, usually in a flow series after Warrior 1, we are then going to open to Warrior 2. So what happens here? Let's take it step by step. The first step that we have to change is the foot. So the foot that is behind is going to be facing in a 90 degrees angle to the outer or to the long side of the mat. What is the same as in Warrior 1 is the knee. We have a bent knee in the leg that is in front. However, in Warrior 2, we often have a wider step, so we can really sink into the front leg here. So the angle between the lower leg and the upper leg is usually a bit smaller. In Warrior 1, we might as well have almost straight leg. Warrior 2, we can go a bit further down, but this is not a must. You can perfectly stay here if that feels more comfortable for you. So, as I said, the knee is more or less the same. What they both have in common is that in Warrior 2, you should also not tip over your ankle with your knee. So it's better to stay either behind the ankle or just above the ankle. This time, the hips are facing almost in a 90 degrees angle to the outside. And this is also known as a hip opener pose. So what do we do with our arms? In fact, there is usually just one position, and that's the arms extended to the side. Nevertheless, there are a few things to look at. Very often, I see people having their arms like this. So the axis of their arms is actually not in line with the mat. So what helps is that you want to have your arms basically just on the center line of your mat that is going from the front of the mat all the way through to the back. So that helps to adjust your arms. We'll just change sides so you can see it from this side as well. What also helps is that you look to the hand that is in the back and you look a little bit further and you kind of want to go there. Because we feel that we are just above the legs, but most of the time we're not. So by looking as far as we can and putting the hand there, or making the hand face there, we're usually just over the body. So this would be the position for Warrior 2. Sometimes we can turn our hands to the upper side and bring them back down again. This also helps to bring the awareness a bit more to the position of the arms. Okay, so these are the most important facts about Warrior 2. Now, what do we have to keep in mind? Warrior 2 is a rather difficult pose if we want to practice it in a really challenging way. So if we stand here, this would be an easy modification for people with knee problems, for instance. But if we're really very far in the back with our foot, this is a pose that requires a lot of strength in the legs. So if you find yourself shaking, for example, or you're struggling with the balance, it's better to take a slightly shorter step, but then stay in the pose a little bit longer. Also, Many people just tip their knee over the foot. If you're super, super strong, this might not be a problem if your tendons and your muscles are used to it. But for most people, it's not very healthy to do that. So I usually place my hand in front of the student's knee and gently press them back a little bit. Now, what to do with Warrior 2? As I said, this is a pose where the hips are facing outward. So very often as a next pose, we would go into reverse warrior. With the legs, nothing changes. It's just the hands, the hand that is in front going up, can also look up, and the other hand is down. This will shift the weight a little bit to the leg in the back, and we can open back in the regular Warrior 2. Also, a very common transition is that we extend the front leg and then from here come to triangle pose. Why is that? We should never change into a pose in an external rotation on a weight-bearing leg. So Warrior 2 is one of the few poses where the hips are already in an external rotation. So if we want to add poses that also have an external rotation, such as the triangle, or for example, the half moon pose, these are poses that require an external rotation. And we don't want to initiate them from a pose that has no hip rotation yet. So to show you what I mean, if we are in a pyramid pose, for instance, here, just to show you, what we shouldn't do is have the weight on this leg and then transition into triangle pose. This is very, very bad for the hip socket. So we want to have a pose like Warrior 2, where the hips are already open, and then from here we stay in the same position with the pelvis, and we can come into triangle pose, or we can come into half moon or any other kind of external hip rotation. So Warrior 2 is quite common for initiating these poses. And of course, after a triangle pose, the same thing in reverse order, I can very well here come back into Warrior 2. Now, what might be misleading, and that's just what I explained with the hip rotation, from Warrior 2, we should not really transition into Warrior 3. Warrior 3 would be an internal hip rotation, so back to the center, which is a little bit easier to do on a weight-bearing leg, which would be our left leg. But the left leg is bent here, or the front leg is bent. So how do I want to put more weight on that leg and then change at the same time to bring my pelvis facing back down to the mat to come to Warrior 3? So this is a very, very difficult transition to do, and I would not recommend to add that after Warrior 2. So Warrior 1 and then Warrior 2 is perfectly fine, but I would not change to Warrior 3 afterwards. Here, it's recommended to add a few more poses for this transition in between. So if you have any questions, please leave it in the comments down below. I'm happy to answer them. And in our next video, we're going to look at another pose. One last thing, counterindications. There are not so many in Warrior 2 as long as it's carried out in a reasonable variation for the student. The only issue could be knee problems if the knee is really tipping over. So that's also something to pay attention to when initiating transitions. Other than that, there's nothing specific in this pose. For people with high blood pressure, it's recommended not to raise the arms too high, but other than that, I would say Warrior 2 is a standard pose that should be in every practice. So thanks for watching, and I hope to see you soon again in this series.